Hello and welcome. I'm Blair Blackwell, and this is the Daily Cyber Brief. Here's today's rundown of the biggest cybersecurity stories you need to know today. Good morning. This is the Daily Cyber Brief for December 22nd. Here are the key cyber risks shaping today's session. Coordinated phishing and account takeover activity aimed at Microsoft 365. Active exposure around Fortinet single sign-on amid a critical auth bypass push. And a notable firmware vulnerability alongside pressure from a ransomware crew upgrading its tooling. We begin with identity and cloud accounts. Researchers report a Russia-aligned operation abusing Microsoft's device code authentication flow to steal Microsoft 365 credentials and take over accounts, in some cases seeding lures from compromised government email addresses. Separate reporting notes multiple threat actors are using the same OAuth device code mechanism, suggesting this is now a broadly adopted technique rather than a single campaign. Meanwhile, Nigerian police arrested developers behind Raccoon 0365, a phishing-as-a-service targeting Microsoft 365 tenants. A positive law enforcement step, but the ecosystem driving credential theft remains active. On the vulnerability front, Shadow Server found more than 25,000 Fortinet devices exposed online with FortiCloud SSO enabled, even as attackers go after a critical authentication bypass. In parallel, a new UEFI firmware issue affecting select Asus, Gigabyte, MSI, and ASRock motherboards allows direct memory access attacks that can bypass early boot protections, the kind of pre-boot weakness that undermines the trust chain from the ground up. And CISA added a WatchGuard Firebox out-of-bounds write flaw to its known exploited vulnerabilities catalog, confirming in-the-wild exploitation and putting a clock on remediation for U.S. federal civilian agencies. Ransomware operators are not standing still. The Ransom House service has upgraded its encryptor from a simple single-phase approach to a more complex, multi-layered process, adjustments that can complicate recovery and detection without changing the business model. Steal, extort, and encrypt at scale. In critical infrastructure and nation-state activity, Danish intelligence publicly attributed a destructive cyber attack on a water utility to Russia, calling it part of broader hybrid operations against Western targets. And after years of quiet, researchers say the Iranian Infi group has resurfaced with new malware activity across multiple countries, with a larger-than-expected footprint. Who should care and why? Any organization running Microsoft 365 should expect elevated phishing pressure on sign-in flows, particularly those that mimic legitimate device code prompts and OAuth consent screens. Enterprises with Fortinet gear, especially where FortiCloud SSO is exposed, face opportunistic probing tied to an authentication bypass, while the WatchGuard KEV entry signals active exploitation that defenders should treat as priority risk. The UEFI flaw is most relevant to IT teams managing affected motherboard platforms in desktops or servers, because pre-boot attacks erode assumptions about endpoint trust. Utilities, municipalities, and other critical services should note that disruptive operations against infrastructure remain in play. And for ransomware, the trend line still favors adversaries iterating on encryption to increase leverage. Looking ahead, watch for follow-on activity against identity providers and single sign-on features as attackers iterate on OAuth and device code abuse. CISA's KEV edition is a reminder that exploitation is ongoing. Timelines apply to U.S. agencies. But the signal is relevant to everyone. Also note CISA's updated Brickstorm backdoor analysis, which adds new indicators and detection rules, underscoring continued interest in stealthy persistence and encrypted command and control. What I'll be watching today: identity providers and Microsoft 365 tenants for consent and device code abuse, cloud-exposed Fortinet and WatchGuard appliances, firmware update pathways for affected UEFI platforms, and ransomware operators testing upgraded encryptors against enterprise backups and recovery processes. The takeaway: identity and firmware remain high-impact fault lines while ransomware tooling evolves. A familiar playbook. but one that rewards disciplined exposure management and rapid prioritization over novelty. That's it for today's edition of the Daily Cyber Brief. Thanks for listening. I'm Blair Blackwell. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not cybersecurity, legal, or financial advice.